What happened to me wasn't an overreach. It wasn't a mistake. It was a coordinated ambush, the kind of quiet hit that looks legal on paper but feels like a siege when it lands at your door. They didn't bring guns. They brought false authority, fake uniforms, and the kind of smug confidence that only comes from never being challenged before. And I let them come, because I wanted to see how far they were willing to go before I reminded them who they were dealing with. But first, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your state in the comments. We've been hearing stories of fake HOA patrols popping up everywhere, and yours might just be next. Stay sharp. Now back to the start. 3 months ago, I bought a small ranch property at the edge of a newly annexed HOA development. Old land, fenced in, minimal neighbors, the kind of place where a man can breathe. I'd spent 17 years training Navy SEALs on covert insertion, hostile extraction, and urban containment. When I retired, I didn't want attention, just quiet. But the HOA had other plans. It started with a drone, buzzed my roof at 6:43 a.m. I watched it from the kitchen window, arms crossed, coffee untouched. It hovered low, just above the tree line, then zipped back toward the eastern perimeter fence. I didn't think much of it until it happened again and again, different days, different angles, surveillance. Then came the letter. You are in violation of HOA Code 4.2. 1. Unauthorized perimeter modifications and suspicious outbuilding structures. They were talking about the tool shed, a 10x12 reinforced shack I built myself, welded hinges, lock bar, insulated roof, not for weapons, not for tactics, just gear, but to them. Anything they didn't understand was a threat. I sent a simple response. The outbuilding is entirely within private bounds. HOA jurisdiction does not extend beyond the annexed residential grid. Kindly cease further contact. They didn't reply. The next week, my mailbox was open and empty mid-morning. I had cameras. The footage showed a man in a dark polo shirt marked Community Enforcement walking the drive. No badge, no ID, just confidence. He didn't knock, didn't leave a note. Just checked the windows, glanced at the shed, and walked off like he'd done it 100 times before. So I started logging everything. Date, time, visual description, direction of entry, duration of stay, license plate, if visible, not, because I was scared. Because this was textbook pattern building behavior. You soften the target with small touches, then you escalate. 2 weeks later, I came home from the hardware store to find 4 men standing in my front yard. 2 with black tactical vests labeled HOA compliance, 1 with a clipboard, and 1 with a walkie barking codes like he was coordinating an op behind them. A woman in heels, arms folded, Karen. I didn't know her name then, but I knew the type, power drunk, paper deep. The kind who leads with authority and folds when challenged. I didn't say a word. I stepped out of the truck, set the bag down, and looked them dead in the eye. Clipboard man approached. Sir, this is an HOA inspection. You've been non-compliant for 47 days. We've been authorized to inspect and seize non-conforming structures. I didn't blink. You have a warrant. We don't need one under community compliance statute. I smirked. That's not how private property works, and that shed's off limits. Karen stepped in. You've been warned. This is your final notice. Who gave you the authority to escalate? I asked. The board. And who trained your patrol? No answer, so I stepped closer, calm, even. You know what I used to do, Karen. Frankly, I don't care. I trained Navy SEALs how to disarm people pretending to have power. She hesitated. The walkie guy shifted back a half step. I pointed at the shed. You go near that door again, and I'll treat it as an illegal incursion under state law. Are you threatening us? No. I'm giving you the kind of warning you never gave me. They left, all 4 of them. No citation, no photo, no follow-up. But I knew it wasn't over. The next day, I found tire tracks behind the fence line. Someone had parked off-road just out of view. Long enough to walk the back of the property and take notes. That's when I activated the silent perimeter triggers, not alarms. Trip sensors buried 3 inches below surface, hooked to a private channel alert system. That night at 2:14 a.m., the first alert came in. Movement at gate 3. Duration, 6 seconds. Then silence. Then gate 2, gate 1. They were probing the perimeter. I didn't confront. I didn't call the sheriff. I watched. And I waited. Because the more rope you give people like this, the deeper they hang themselves when they think they're still in charge. But when they came back, they didn't bring warnings. They brought fake cuffs, phony uniforms, and a false arrest order. And that's when the gloves came off. They came at dawn. No warning, no knock, no legal paperwork. Just a black SUV rolling slow down the gravel drive like it belonged there. 3 men stepped out. 2 wore the same fake, HOA compliance gear I'd seen before, black vests, no department patches, clip-on badges bought off a surplus site. The third, he wore plain clothes, but carried himself like someone in charge, clipboard tucked under his arm, hand on his hip like a sidearm should be there. Only thing he was armed with was entitlement. I stood on the porch, arms folded, waiting. I'd already silenced the perimeter alarm when the trip line buzzed. They hadn't seen it, didn't know they'd been marked the second they turned onto my land. They stopped 10 feet from my steps. Clipboard guy spoke first. "Sir, we're here on behalf of Silver Pines Ridge HOA to perform a mandatory compliance seizure. You've refused inspection and ignored written orders." I said nothing. "You'll need to vacate the front structure while we inspect the shed and surrounding modifications. If you resist, we've been authorized to detain until law enforcement arrives." Detain. That's the word that clicked everything into motion. I stepped down one stair, calm, controlled. Who authorized that? The board. The board of what? A golf club, a barbecue team. The man blinked. The homeowners association. You know detainment without state authority is unlawful, right? We're operating under Compliance Code 18A, which has no legal power on private land not fully annexed under HOA charter. And this isn't your land. He motioned to one of the other men. The guy stepped forward. Handcuffs in his belt. He was reaching. "Now, I've trained men to breach compounds with less hesitation. You don't give a command like that unless you're ready for what follows." He wasn't. By the time he'd reached his hip, I was already moving. 2 steps down. 1 pivot. I grabbed his wrist, locked the elbow, and dropped him to his knees before his brain caught up. His buddy flinched, backed up, didn't draw. Clipboard guy raised his hands. All right. You just attempted an unlawful detainment under false authority," I said, twisting the cuffs out of the man's hand and tossing them into the dirt. "That's felony impersonation. We weren't going to hurt you. You just walked onto private property in matching vests, threatened detainment, and reached for cuffs." The man on the ground was wheezing. I let him go. He scrambled back like I'd lit him on fire. I pointed to the fence line. "You've got 10 seconds to leave this property. Otherwise, the sheriff gets a call and I turn this footage over to federal investigators." Clipboard guy was shaking now. "Karen said you wouldn't push it this far." I smiled. "Karen doesn't know who I am." They ran, didn't walk, didn't argue. They got back in the SUV, reversed down my drive like the gates of hell were behind them, and they were, because I wasn't just some ex-SEAL, I was a trainer. I taught elite teams how to assess threat vectors, control escalation, and respond surgically to deception. These guys. They were playing a game, but I was trained for war. I called the sheriff's department that afternoon, told them everything, didn't embellish, didn't dramatize, just stated the facts. The dispatcher listened. Then transferred me directly to the county deputy who handled HOA-related civil disputes. His voice dropped when I told him the address. "We've had a few odd calls from that area," he said, "but nothing this organized. They used a uniformed team, tried to place me in cuffs. One reached for my wrist. Do you have video? Every angle. We're sending someone out." Deputy Collins arrived at 5:15 p.m., unmarked cruiser, plainclothes, professional. I liked him immediately. He took statements, watched the footage. Then asked me one question. "Are you pressing charges?" I looked out at the horizon. The sun was dipping, birds flitting near the trees. The world didn't look like a battlefield, but that's how it always starts. "Not yet," I said, "because if I do, they'll just lawyer up and delay everything. I want them exposed, not just fined." He nodded. "Then I'll keep this on file. But if they step on that land again, call me. We'll bring the real badge next time." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, because I was planning. I'd let them get close. Let them show their tactics, let them make fools of themselves. But now, it was my turn to move. The next morning I printed 30 flyers, black and white, straightforward language. "Did you know your HOA is using fake officers to enforce made-up rules?" Then below it, "These individuals are impersonating authority, violating state law, and threatening residents. Know your rights. They don't have the power they claim." A neighbor who's seen what real enforcement looks like. No name, no signature, just truth. I taped one to the clubhouse. Another to the mailbox kiosk. Slipped a few in doorways. By noon, 5 different people had stopped me to ask, "Wait, you're the guy with the fake cop thing." The seed was planted. And Karen, she could feel the storm coming. That evening I got a letter, hand-delivered, sealed with a gold HOA crest. Inside was a one-line message. "You are being summoned for an emergency HOA tribunal meeting on Sunday." Tribunal. They really thought this was a courtroom. They had no idea. They were walking straight into a SEAL instructor's ambush. And what happened next? Let's just say they never saw it coming. So what happened? Well, before we see how I did it, if you're enjoying this story and love such dramas, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber keeps me motivated to dig deeper, uncover more wild stories, and bring you even crazier content. Your support means everything. It's what keeps this channel going strong. And trust me, there's plenty more chaos coming your way. Back to the story. They called it a tribunal. But what it really was a folding table in the back room of the clubhouse. 4 chairs on one side, 1 chair alone on the other. An audience of maybe 10 homeowners, invited for transparency. No lawyers, no real authority. Just smoke, mirrors, and people who thought HOA meant high order of authority. They didn't know they were about to walk into a debriefing led by the kind of man who trained special ops to handle black sites. I walked in slow, calm, wore a plain black tee, no logos, no military brag. But I let the posture speak. Karen sat in the middle of the board, pale gray blouse, arms folded, smile fake. To her left, Greg, clipboard guy. He didn't make eye contact. To her right, 2 people I hadn't seen before, likely stand-ins. One of them spoke first. "Let the record show this is an emergency HOA review hearing regarding non-compliance, aggressive resistance to authority, and unlawful conduct toward board enforcement." I didn't sit. "Let the record show none of you have jurisdiction over private property not bound by the Annex Agreement of 2021. The room went quiet. Karen leaned forward. "We're not here to debate technicalities." "Funny," I said, "because I brought them." I pulled a binder from my bag and dropped it on the table. Hard, it echoed in the room. "That's the annex map, with highlighted zones. According to your own documents, this land wasn't fully ratified under the HOA perimeter when I purchased it." "That's irrelevant. It's binding." I cut in. "Which means every patrol you've sent, every fake badge, every so-called citation is trespassing. Civil and criminal." The woman on the end looked uncomfortable. Greg shifted in his seat. Karen just smiled tighter. "We didn't know your land wasn't under full governance. You didn't care." She stood now, walked around the table like she was addressing a courtroom. "We've received multiple reports that you've been hostile, paranoid, and combative, that you've trained with firearms on site, that you've made threats. Your presence is making people uncomfortable." I smiled slightly. "You want to talk about threats?" I pulled a USB drive from my pocket and held it up. "That contains footage of your compliance patrol trying to cuff me on private land. One of them reached for my wrist. You want to see aggressive? Start there." Karen opened her mouth, then shut it. Because the board didn't know about the footage. They didn't know the full story. I continued. "Let me ask you all a question. Who here trained your enforcement team?" Silence. "Who vetted them, licensed them, filed paperwork, logged their names with the city?" No answer. "You didn't." "Because they're not real." The woman on the end finally spoke. "Are you saying the patrol doesn't exist?" "I'm saying it exists illegally. And now that it's impersonated authority, it's liable." I paced slowly in front of the table. "I'm not a rookie. I trained Tier 1 operators. I've filed enough after-action reports to bury this place in red tape. But instead of pressing charges, I'm giving you a choice." Karen folded her arms tighter. "You're in no position to offer ultimatums." "Not an ultimatum," I said. "A shield. You dissolve the fake patrol, issue a formal apology to the residents, and you never send another soul near my land again. Or I release everything, the footage, the badge scans, the trespass logs, the voicemail from your little clipboard soldier." I paused. "And I file it directly to the sheriff, the DA, and the local news." The board was dead quiet. Then Greg whispered something to Karen. She didn't respond. Finally, the man on the end cleared his throat. "This is highly irregular. So is dressing civilians like cops and sending them to arrest a veteran on private land. Karen's voice rose. You think this makes you a hero? You're just trying to scare people. You're the threat. I stepped closer. I'm the wall that stood up when you thought nobody would. You don't get to define the narrative anymore. Someone from the audience spoke up. Lucy, older woman, quiet voice. Why did you send those men, Karen? Why didn't you tell us they weren't real? Karen turned. Because someone had to enforce order. Lucy stood. You crossed the line. Another resident followed. I have kids. I thought those were real officers. Another. I supported you until today. You went too far. The tribunal unraveled in real time. Karen tried to regain control, but the room turned. Even the board members started whispering to each other. I took a deep breath. You want order, I said. Then start by telling the truth. You tried to intimidate a trained operator. Now imagine what you did to people who don't have my background. I walked out of that room without waiting for a vote, because I already knew the outcome. The tape would spread. The residents would talk. The board would fracture. And Karen, she'd either step down or try something desperate. I expected her to run, expected Karen to resign quietly, spin a letter about health issues, and vanish into the HOA records with a shrug and a fake apology. But like most people who taste power they never earned, she couldn't let it go. She didn't step down. She doubled down. 2 days after the so-called tribunal blew up in her face, I found a bright orange citation nailed to my front gate. Not taped, nailed. Big red stamp on it. Mandatory removal order, non-compliant structure / defensive fortifications. I laughed, out loud. Because the structure they were referring to, the shed I'd built with nothing but my own tools, sweat, and hours. Suddenly they were calling it a bunker. Karen wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to bait me into a mistake, to get angry, to lash out. To give her something she could spin into a threat. But I didn't take the bait. I took notes. That same evening I found out she'd sent another flyer around the neighborhood, hand-delivered again. No HOA letterhead this time, just a cheap copy with bold text. You feel safe. One of your neighbors is a military extremist. He's resisted community law, threatened volunteers, and built a fortified compound in our backyard. If you or your children feel unsafe, contact HOA emergency response. She was painting me as a domestic threat, and worst of all, she used my background, my years of service and training to make it sound dangerous. That's when I stopped playing defense. I called Deputy Collins. He picked up on the first ring. She's escalating, I said. We figured she might. We've had 3 calls from your area today, all anonymous. One claimed you were stockpiling weapons. Another said you installed surveillance towers. I shook my head. She's trying to get me red flagged. I can flag the complaints as retaliatory, but if she keeps stirring panic, you'll need more than local coverage. Good, I said. Because I already made the call. That night, I activated my backup team. No weapons, no uniforms, just a few retired professionals from my SEAL training days, one cybersecurity guy, one retired JAG lawyer, and one guy who used to teach tactical de-escalation to federal agencies. They owed me. I trained them, and within 24 hours we had the goods. One of them dug into the HOA's financials. Turns out, Karen had been paying compliance contractors under the table for over a year, not just in our community but in 2 others. No background checks, no contracts. Just quiet cash payments to private actors she dressed up like patrol units. The guy she sent to cuff me, he wasn't just a poser. He was a former repo agent with a criminal misrepresentation charge from 2016. And Karen had signed him onto a private agreement logged under her name, not the board's. The JAG pulled the HOA's insurance liability docs. Guess what? None of those enforcement actions were covered, meaning if anyone got hurt during those fake patrols, the entire board would be personally liable. And now, we had all of it on record, so I wrote a single email, attached all the documentation. Labeled the subject line, Formal Notice of Federal Complaint, False Enforcement and Civil Abuse, Silver Pines Ridge HOA. Then I CC'd the HOA Regulatory Bureau, the County DA's office, the local press, and the neighborhood's private group thread. I hit send, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, 3 neighbors had texted me screenshots of Karen's post on the community page being deleted. By 3 p.m., Greg had officially resigned for personal reasons, and at 6:22 p.m., I received a knock at the door. Deputy Collins stood on my porch. He handed me a printed document. Karen's being investigated for fraudulent activity and impersonation. She's not allowed to contact you or step within 100 feet of your property. I nodded. Took long enough. He smiled. Some people need to fall all the way before they realize they can't fly. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, not because the fight was over, but because Karen had finally triggered her own self-destruction. All I'd done was give her room to do it, but we weren't finished yet. Because the HOA had one last card they hadn't played, and in the ashes of Karen's downfall, someone else was already trying to take her place. Karen was done, gone from the clubhouse, gone from the group chats, gone from the board, but she wasn't the real threat anymore. She was just the face. The storm that drew everyone's attention, while someone else stayed quiet in the shadows, pulling strings and preparing their move. That someone was Greg. See, Greg played the long game. While Karen was on the front lines barking threats and handing out fines, Greg was behind her, printing the policies, editing the minutes, writing the violation codes. He didn't speak up much, didn't raise his voice, didn't get confrontational. But if Karen was the match, Greg was the fuel. And once she burned out, he was ready to slide right into her seat. The board scheduled a special session just 4 days after Karen's removal, supposedly to restructure leadership and restore community stability. But when the agenda leaked, it included a motion to authorize temporary emergency leadership under Vice President Greg Stanton, including limited enforcement reinstatement for rapid response compliance matters. There it was again, emergency powers, enforcement authority. They were trying to rebuild the same weapon, just with a different name on the trigger. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I showed up to the session 20 minutes early. The clubhouse was quiet, the chairs were half set up. Greg stood by the podium, flipping through documents. When he saw me, he froze. I didn't smile. Can't help but notice you're in Karen's chair. He adjusted his collar. Someone has to keep order. Someone already tried. She failed. She was careless. She was yours. He didn't answer. I walked past him and placed a folder on the table. Inside, records of every policy Greg had written or revised over the last year, a timeline that proved he authorized the hiring of the fake patrol units, and a copy of an HOA check with his signature. Made out to Security Consulting Group LLC, the same shell company that provided Karen's enforcers. I leaned in. Karen was the distraction, but you're the problem. By the time the residents arrived, the folder had already done its job. Whispers, side eyes. People flipping through printed copies. Greg tried to hold the room. He opened with a speech about stability and safety and protecting our values. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Then Lucy stood up, same quiet neighbor who questioned Karen during the tribunal. "Greg," she said, "did you approve the payments to the enforcement team?" He hesitated. "That was a board decision, signed by you, on behalf of the board." I stepped forward. "Signed before the board even saw the proposal. You created the LLC, you funneled payments. And when Karen fell, you thought nobody would look deeper." Another neighbor stood up, Mark, retired military. "You sent those guys to my door last fall, said they were following up on a complaint about backyard noise. I told them I never filed anything. They said it didn't matter." He looked at Greg dead on. "That's not enforcement, that's intimidation." Greg tried to recover. "We needed structure. We were losing compliance." "No," I cut in. "You were losing control. And when Karen got sloppy, you tried to disappear behind her, but you're not invisible anymore." The vote came faster than expected. Emergency motion. Remove Greg Stanton from the board effective immediately. The count, 19 in favor, 1 against. Guess who voted no? Greg stood, gathered his papers, and walked out. No statement, no apology, just silence. The board held a second vote, this time to dismantle the HOA enforcement wing entirely. Passed. Then a third vote. Establish a resident committee to rewrite all HOA enforcement guidelines with full transparency. Passed. Then a final one. Appoint an independent compliance auditor to investigate all prior fines, fees, and violations over the past 3 years. Passed. One by one, the weapons Greg and Karen built were disarmed. After the meeting, several neighbors walked up to me. Some just nodded. Some thanked me. One man said, "I didn't know the rules could be challenged." I told him the truth. They always can. You just have to know how to spot the people who are afraid of being questioned. That night, I took the patrol vests I'd recovered, the ones they left behind when they ran, and packed them in a box, labeled it, "Property of the Fear Machine Shut Down," and I dropped it off at the clubhouse door. The battle was over, but I had one last thing to do, not for the board. Not for the residents, for me, because before I could really move on, I had to go back to where it all started, to the fence line, to the trip sensors, to the moment the fake patrol thought they could walk into a SEAL trainer's space and take control. I've seen a lot of final standoffs. Some end in fire, some end in retreat, the worst ones. They end in silence because no one knows what really happened. But this one ended with clarity. A week after Greg's removal, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, calmer. The fake patrols were gone. The petty citations stopped. People started waving again, not out of fear, but acknowledgement. Even the fences that once felt like walls now just marked where your yard ended, not where your rights stopped. I spent the week cleaning out the shed, reorganized my gear, repaired the motion sensors I hadn't touched since the first incident, and that's when I noticed it. A single trip alert, Gate 1, 7:18 p.m., slow, deliberate, no retreat signal. Someone was just standing there, watching. I stepped out, quiet, didn't grab a weapon, didn't need to. When I reached the edge of the property, I saw her. Karen. She wasn't dressed like a power player anymore. No heels, no clipboard, just a hoodie, sneakers, and a face that looked 5 years older. She stood with her hands in her pockets, just outside the boundary line. Didn't move. Didn't speak, so I broke the silence. "You're trespassing. I'm not on your land." She was right. I nodded. "What do you want?" "I didn't expect it to go that far," she said. I gave her a look. "You hired fake cops to detain me. It wasn't supposed to be you. You were just supposed to comply." "You mean fold." "I mean disappear." There it was, the honesty, not brave, not defiant, just tired. "You lost," I said. "I know. You turned people into weapons and called it leadership." She looked down. "I thought if we let things slide, it would all fall apart." "That's what people like you never understand," I said. "Order doesn't come from control, it comes from trust." "So what now?" she asked. "You go home, you stay gone, you let this place heal. And you," I looked at the horizon. "I'll stay as long as they need me." She nodded once, then turned and walked away. No drama, no scene, just a slow fade into the trees. I stood there until the sky turned orange, watching, listening, breathing. 3 days later, the board finalized its transition to a new structure. No more enforcement units, no more intimidation, just community, actual community. And they gave me something I didn't expect, a plaque. Nothing dramatic, just a simple piece of steel bolted to the clubhouse wall. It read, "For standing your ground so we could find ours." I didn't need it, but I accepted it, because not every fight ends in gunfire or broken bones. Some end with a conversation and a room full of people who finally woke up. I still walk the fence line every morning, not out of fear, but out of habit. Because when you've trained SEALs to clear enemy compounds and extract hostages under live fire, you don't forget how to protect what matters. Now, the shed still stands, the sensors still blink, and the neighborhood finally feels like the home it should have been from day one. I didn't win because I was aggressive. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I stayed calm, focused, and absolutely unwilling to back down when the line was crossed. If you're listening to this and you've ever been bullied by a board, an HOA, or anyone with a fake badge and a loud mouth, remember, you don't need a title to stand your ground. You just need a spine and a line they don't get to cross.